Good morning, grade sixes.
Morning, sir.
Today we're doing hot deserts. As I told you already, hot deserts are not the only deserts. You get something called a cold desert as well. Right, so a desert is classified as a dry area that does not get more than 250 millimeters of rain. And as we've already spoken, you get cold deserts as well. You get frozen deserts, right? So an ice desert as well. If we look at that map on page 60, we see, what does the key tell us? Okay, the dark green are the desert areas. So the dark green is the desert areas. What do we notice if we look at those lines? What do we notice about the desert areas? Where are they located? Mostly. Some of them exceptions, but 90% of those deserts are like half in the same type of areas. Are they on the equator?
No.
How many deserts do you see on the equator? Zero. And we discussed this last week. Why? Why would there be no deserts on the equator?
Because
Yes?
Because by the equator it is super duper hot and evaporation happens by water and ice.
And what does that cause then?
Rain.
Right, so on the equator, we have our highest rain areas. Because it is so hot, water evaporates at a very fast speed, and it is always raining. Okay, so instead of deserts at our hottest areas, we have rainforests. Okay. Now, you notice on the map, if we go about 40 degrees north to the upper side or the northern side of Africa, the parts of Asia, south parts of Asia, we see a lots of deserts. And then if we do the opposite, if we go the same amount of degrees to the south, in Namibia, South America, Australia, we notice again large areas of hot deserts. Why is this then? Anyone? It's the opposite reason, right? So, in these, on the equator, we have lots of rain. Okay, lots of food for the plants. It's going great. Now, if we follow this south line through South America, South Africa, and Australia, is it still hot in those areas?
No. Yes, it is.
Yes, it is still hot, right? It's still 30 degrees up and above. But now it's the degrees have fallen just into that sweet spot where it's hot, but it's not hot enough for it to constantly rain. So now what happens? It's a perfect spot where it's so hot the plants are struggling to grow, but it's not hot enough for it to constantly rain, like on the equator. Because it's hotter on the equator, but now there was this tipping point, but because it's now so hot, it keeps raining. Now when you go south, it gets cooler and cooler and cooler, and then you get to this point where it's still hot, desert hot, but not hot enough for continuous rain, and then you form a desert. Now the same thing happens in the northern hemisphere as well. Those areas are all extremely hot, but not hot enough for it to continuously rain. Yes?
so how come the desert got filled with so much sand? How's it possible for miles and miles of kilometers for there to only be sand in deserts?
Okay, because no matter where you go on land, you are walking on sand. There's usually just some plants between you and the sand. But now in those deserts, the plants have all died, so all that's left is the sand. So we are walking on sand. So just imagine in your mind that usually that would all just be plants, but now because the plants have disappeared, all that's left is the sand. Now, what is sand? Where does it come from?
The thing that's repair and plants die.
Okay, if I take a rock and I start beating that rock with a hammer, what am I going to be left with? Sand. Grains of sand. So rock or sand is just fine. Sand is just fine rock. So if you look at a rock if you look at sand like a sand grain through a telescope or through a magnifying glass, it's just going to look like a piece of rock. So what happens in the deserts, why there is so much sand, is because there's no plants to protect. Remember what we talked about in deforestation? The plants protect the ground and keeps it from eroding. Okay? Now the plants disappear. Now when the wind comes, there's no plants keeping the sand on the ground. So the wind just takes this entire dune of sand and moves it. It moves through the rocks and it pulls small piece of rocks off the rock entirely the whole time, because there's no trees to actually stop the wind. So it's hitting the rocks are fall apart piece by piece. When it's raining, when the rains come, they wash down the mountain. There's no plants to stop flooding, right? And so the rocks start getting broken down over thousands and thousands of years. And then you get a heap of sand that once was a mountain. We see this at our mountain, right? Yeah, if you remember last year, I taught you that our mountain is one of the oldest in the world, right? The Magaliesberg mountain range. And if you look at the mountain, you'll see it goes like this, and then all of a sudden it's the mountain. Now, all that sand going up to the mountain was once the mountain. So the mountain was once a lot higher. But over the years, those rocks start breaking apart. They start eroding and they become sand. All right, so let's continue. Remember now, these are just hot deserts. So let's quickly look at activity 8 that we're going to do. Point to the area on the map where each of the following hot deserts is found. So now we'll do this verbally and do number 2 verbally as well, and then we'll continue to climate. Okay. Kirabetse, tell me where the Sahara Desert is. Oh, okay, let's do like a hot cold thing. The Sahara Desert, is it on what continent is it? Northern, it's on Africa, on the northern side. So if I point to the Sahara Desert, if you look on that green, dark green on Africa, right? It's the second, it's in the second and first area. So it's that top left area. So if you look at the elephant's ear, it's that top left area of Africa. It's also the biggest desert in the world. Right. Then the Great Victoria Desert, Southwest Australia. Okay. The next one is the Mojave Desert in North America. The Arabian Desert in the Middle East. The Thar Desert in India and Pakistan, and the Atacama Desert in South America. Okay. So I want to quickly talk about a project they're trying to launch. I haven't read recent news about it, but the governments in Central Africa, so if you look on the equator line, those countries on the equator line have started a project where they want to stop the desert from spreading. So the Sahara Desert is spreading, right? They want to stop that. So they want to do a project where they plant a line or like a border of trees in its way. So imagine the Sahara Desert is spreading like this, and they want to block the path of the spread with a forest. Now let's just say this plan would work, okay? Because that is how you stop a desert, is by planting trees in its way, so that ground erosion and the trees will cool the temp, everything nice, né? Do you think it could work?
Yes.
What would we require, or what would we need to do to make this plan work? Well, first we need to plant enough trees, and then we need to make sure those trees are protected, and we need to make sure those trees get water, and that is our problem, right? But luckily we know this middle area in the Congo and such, they get lots of water. All right, let's continue to climate, temperature and rainfall. The temperatures in hot deserts are usually between 20 to 25 degrees. In some places, the temperatures can be as high as 50 degrees Celsius, and the nights can become very cold. Hot deserts have very little rainfall, and therefore, and there is often no rain for many months. The graph below shows the average temperatures and rainfall patterns in hot deserts. Both sets figures are placed on one graph. Okay. So now we see a combination graph, one a line and one a bar. So the line graph shows us the temperatures, how they are moving in this certain months, and the other one shows us the rainfall. When we look at those temperatures that the book tells us, it's not very surprising, right? And it's not actually very extreme. So you see the average temperature is 20 to 25 degrees. Here in our lovely South Africa, that's a lovely day. It's actually a bit too cold, right? And when it's 25 degrees, we don't want to go swimming. Yeah, because the water is cold, right? But the average temperature in a desert is 20 to 25 degrees. And they say it can go as high as 50. And some deserts definitely have that problem. So do you think the temperature is the problem?
Yeah.
Do you think the temperature is the reason there's a desert?
Yes.
Well, on one side, yes. But the book continues and says, if we look at that bar graph that represents the rainfall, we see it's extremely low.
Because of the temperature.
So don't you think that is the problem? Now, Latabu says that is the problem. The temperature is the problem, because if it was hotter, maybe it would rain more. Now, rainfall's main problem is temperature. But as we discussed last week, there could be different problems facing us in that area. It is important for us to be aware of these challenges, because it is our world, right? It is our kingdom, and we need to look after our kingdom. So maybe one day you can start a movement or a business or a charity or a non-profit to fight this problem. But first, before you can fight this problem, you need to be aware of it. All right, next page. We're going to do activity 9. Good luck. Enjoy.